year after its introduction, the Liberal government's controversial gun control bill has passed in the House of Commons. Bill C-21 will now head to the Senate. The legislation will put restrictions on handguns, increase penalties for firearm trafficking, and try to curb homemade ghost guns.
Some of the provisions within the project of law C-21, which will give additional tools to police, including raising maximum sentences to go after hardened gun traffickers, including $450 million to bolster the resources for CBSA. And if the Conservatives were serious about protecting our communities from gun violence, then they would reverse their position, support these measures so we can go after the criminals who've been terrorizing our communities for far too long with guns. Thank you.
My Conservative team and I have forced Justin Trudeau into a temporary but humiliating climb down today. Trudeau desperately wanted to ban hunting rifles. Not only did he send a Liberal MP in to throw a sucker punch at our lawful and licensed firearms owners by banning their hunting rifles, he was asked specifically if that was his goal, and he said yes.
Bill C-21 has been a very controversial piece of legislation with dropped amendments, filibustering, and months of back and forth. Today, we are going to speak with a Liberal MP that saw this bill through the committee stage. Hello, and welcome back to Political Debrief, the show where I, Josh Oliverio, talk about the issues in Canadian politics and how they all affect young Canadians. Today, I'm excited to be joined by BC Liberal MP Taleeb Noormohamed to talk about Bill C-21. On a side note, we are trying something new on Political Debrief. The video version of the podcast, which is found on YouTube, is going to be a condensed version of the interview featuring just the main topic. The audio podcast, which can be found in the description down below, will have the full interview. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Taleeb Noormohamed. December 7th, 2021, you were named to the Public Safety and National Security Committee. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that committee, what some of its roles are, and what type of work you've done over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So when you get elected, you get the chance to they say, hey, listen, what are you interested in? What committees do you like? And I had spent time when I was in government. I had spent time in the Department of Public Safety working on national security related matters. I had worked on the Air India bombing review. I had worked on the, provisions of the Anti-Terrorism Act. So I knew the files extremely well, and I actually really am interested in them. And so when I got appointed to the committee, I was actually really quite excited because the committee deals with, as it's called, public safety and national security. So you deal with everything from Russian interference, foreign interference, all the way through to gun control, as everybody now well knows. It's a very, very wide range of topics, but your fundamental objective is to make sure that you are helping to create laws that keep the country safe. And under the remit of the committee is all of the public safety stuff. So you have policing, you have prisons, you have national security. So you have CSIS, you have the border, but you also have, natural emergencies. So for example, emergency preparedness, for example, disaster management, all those things fall under the purview of the committee. And so, unfortunately, we live in times where it has been, from a climate change perspective, as well as from a political perspective, a lot of the things that our committee would deal with have become really of the moment and very, very current.
Because you used to work in Public Safety Canada, as you mentioned, how does your work and experience there, how do you think that helps you with your work on the committee?
I think it does two things. One is you have witnesses that come to committee all the time. Invariably, many of those witnesses are either subject matter experts or public servants. And so I've had the really good fortune of having good relationships and sort of friendships and sort of history with a lot of the folks that appear before the committee and who have been witnesses. So that makes it a little bit easier to ask, I think, sometimes tougher questions for them to feel comfortable responding. But the other thing too is, look, when you spend as much time as you do in the subject matter, it makes it easier to understand and to then adapt as things are coming your way. And I think it's been hugely valuable to me. That time at public safety as a public servant has been hugely valuable to me now in the political role, trying to help actually craft the legislation and to kind of keep things to account.
One of the pieces of work that the committee has had over the last year has been the gun control legislation, Bill C-21. And And some people listening might go, Josh, what's C-21? I don't follow this kind of stuff. What is C-21?
Well, so Josh, I'm going to ask you, what do you think C-21 is? And I'm going to tell you why I asked you that question in a second.
Well, I followed C-21. I followed it through its legislative pipeline. C-21 is it's a bill that amends the criminal code to add more prohibited firearms and create a buyback program for those firearms. Am I correct? Am I not? Am I correct?
Pretty close.
Close? Okay.
Yeah, pretty close. But you have a very nuanced and thoughtful approach to this. And one of the challenges with C-21, as you saw, is that it was treated as a bit of a blunt force instrument to say that people were going after hunters and indigenous communities and taking away people's rights and all that kind of stuff. And it actually wasn't. The irony was that C-21 sought to do a few things. And I think in the new iteration with the amendments actually does some very, very good things, in particular, something that matters to me a lot, which is getting ghost guns off the street. Right? You know what a ghost gun is, right?
I do, but maybe you could.
So for some of your listeners, so a ghost gun is a gun that you make at home. And with 3D printers, I can quite literally go to the Best Buy 5 minutes from my office, buy a 3D printer, buy some polymer, and print out a gun that is effectively ready to go, as long as I can order online the barrel, the slide, and the trigger assembly. I can put that gun together literally in 10 minutes. There's no serial number on anything. I can go kill someone, dump the weapon in a garbage can, and no one will ever be able to trace it back to me. And the problem that we're running into in urban centers, particularly places like Vancouver, is that the crime guns that we're seeing and that cops are seeing more and more are these homemade guns. And so one of the things that I really wanted to make sure we did in C-21, and that's why me and others brought amendments forward around this, is to make sure that ghost guns become something that are almost impossible to manufacture by doing two things. One is making it illegal to 3D print weapons at home using the code that people are using. And number two is ensuring that we treat barrel slides and trigger assemblies, that is to say the parts that you need for ghost guns, as though they are regulated in the same manner as firearms. And that's a huge step. Because it gives law enforcement the tool that they need, that they've been asking for, to address fundamentally one of the biggest issues that we're seeing, emerging issues that we're seeing right now in the universe of guns.
So I think that there was a lot of controversy surrounding this bill. You're right. I think you mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think one of the concerns that there was with the bill, especially when it got through committee, is that the government tabled some amendments that specifically Indigenous people say they were not consulted properly about. And they basically, it added a ton of guns to this ban list. Many of them consisted of, hunting weapons traditionally used by Indigenous people for hunting. Bill C-21 is making its way through the Senate now. And I think it took a while because there was a lot of, controversy around it. Do you wish that these amendments were handled differently? You wish that there was more consultation before the government acted and introduced these amendments or introduced the bill in general?
Look, I think, hindsight is always 20/20. I am glad that we pulled I'm glad that we pulled the amendments, and I'm glad that we brought different amendments forward. And I am glad that period allowed us to do more consultation. I think it was important to do some of the things that we did, particularly in respect of Indigenous communities. And I think the other piece that I think is very important in this is that the regulated weapons piece, particularly the provision around manufacture date, that is to say, guns designed after the date that this law comes into effect, will give people a lot of peace of mind. Do I wish there had been more consultation? I think there's always room for more consultation. And that's why I actually am really glad that we took the step that we did to pull the amendments back and to reintroduce other amendments that I think make the bill better.
Really quick before we move on to another topic, just while we'll wrap up public safety here. There was a controversy last week, the week before, whenever the last week of the House was, about some meetings getting canceled, and from the opposition's perspective, the chair of the committee wanting to not have a meeting, so a motion couldn't come up to call the public safety minister over the Paul Bernardo situation. Do you think that the collaboration of the committee has do you think that there's not as much collaboration on the committee anymore? Do you think that you guys will be able to kind of resurrect this controversy?
No, look, I think notwithstanding C-21, I think our committee has been an extremely productive one. Look, I mean, we had a unanimous report on a unanimous study on guns and gangs. You think about this: liberals, conservatives, New Democrats, and the Bloc agreeing to a unanimous report on guns and gangs. I mean, that tells you something. That tells you that there is a willingness to work together. And I think we've done this on a number of on foreign interference, on Russian interference. We did a study that was unanimous. So, and even on Bill C-20, which we're dealing with right now, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of collaboration that is happening. I think it's very easy. It's very easy to play politics with what happens in a committee. Meetings get canceled by the chair all the time. Witnesses can't appear all the time. Sometimes it's in our control, sometimes it's not in our control. And the concept these days of manufactured outrage to be able to get clicks or to be able to get clips is actually something that is not great, in my opinion, for democracy. And so I think we all have an obligation, regardless of our political party or regardless of our affiliation, to ask the question, is it worth it for me to get this clip if it's going to compromise the integrity of how Canadians perceive our democratic institutions? And I think that's a tough question to answer for some people, but it shouldn't be. I mean, the answer to that question is never do anything that is going to call into question the integrity of the institution. Because you can disagree with who's in power. You can disagree with who the prime minister is. You can disagree with the law that's passed. But we have to hold true to our democratic values, and we have to hold true to the way in which we value the institution of Parliament. And so when things like meetings getting canceled becomes a flashpoint, you have to actually ask the question, so hold on a second, why did the meeting actually get canceled? And why is it there was really only one opposition party that was all up in arms over it? And I think often you find that if it's a real news story, sometimes it has traction and sometimes it dies pretty quickly when everybody goes, hold on, that's not really a credible thing to get all upset about. And I think that's, that circumstance may have been one of the latter, I would argue.
All right, MP Noormohamed, thanks so much for coming on Political Debrief.
Thanks, Josh. Great chatting with you.
And that's it for this episode of Political Debrief. Thanks so much for watching. I would invite you to visit the description down below to check out the audio-only version of the podcast, which featured my full conversation with Taleeb Noormohamed. It was a really interesting conversation, and did you know that Taleeb Noormohamed was heavily involved with the Vancouver Olympics back in 2010? There's an interesting story there, and I invite you to check it out. Thanks again for watching. See you on the next episode.